And folks, we are in E3. Again, that is E3. We welcome you to day two of the conference while she's getting those last moment touches finished. If you haven't yet, please comment your name within the chat box to ensure you receive your credit for today's attendance in the session. If you should find yourself having any questions or comments for our speaker, please note them in the chat box, and hopefully we'll have some time after her presentation to discuss those and get those answered for you. Also, if you prefer to just ask them yourself, that's completely fine too. We have some folks that are more outgoing and more, what's the word I'm looking for, extroverted than others. So if you would like me to read the questions later on for you, that's completely fine. Um, Please remember to keep yourselves muted for the duration of the presentation as to not disrupt her flow of thinking, because I know that can be really hard sometimes. But again, at the end, if you have any questions or comments you would like to add in, that will be the best time to unmute yourself. So yes.
Okay, are you ready for me?
I'm ready if you're ready, Susie.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I regret that I don't have a double screen so that I can have everyone's picture over on one side to see who all is here. I know that many of you have been attending this conference for years, and maybe some of you it's your first time. We are very honored to be able to present this information to you and spread the word about collegiate recovery and collegiate recovery in West Virginia. I'm Susie Mullins. I'm the program coordinator for the West Virginia Collegiate Recovery Network. We are housed at the Alliance for the Economic Development of Southern West Virginia, which is under the Marshall University Research Corporation. So it's a very lengthy introduction as to our program and how we are housed. We'll get into all the funding and information about that, but we are funded through the state opioid response grants through West Virginia DHHR. So those are the SOAR grants. And several of our schools also receive funding through the West Virginia DHHR Office of Drug Control Policy. And then there are some schools that are contributing funding and starting programs with their own funding. So I want to start off with just a couple of things to kind of set the frame for what we're going to be talking about today. And we'll get into talking a little bit more about recovery for those of you that might not be as familiar. But for us, recovery is the expectation, not the exception, when it comes to individuals when they have a community and a supportive environment. And that's really, when we get down to the crux of collegiate recovery, that is what collegiate recovery programs do. They allow for individuals in recovery to create a community and to have a supportive environment to pursue higher education. And then there's a young man that's been in collegiate recovery in a couple of different parts of the country. Most recently, Vanderbilt. I believe that he dropped out of high school. He went back to college, and when he graduated Vanderbilt, he was the valedictorian. And this was one of the statements that I've heard him talk about. And, we often hear recovery is possible. And he added to it, and I thought this was just really profound, that recovery is possible, but with collegiate recovery, anything is possible. So I really liked that and wanted to share that from him. So our vision for the West Virginia Collegiate Recovery Network is that every student in or seeking recovery will have a supportive community and array of services and resources at any institution of higher education in West Virginia. And then we have a few components of our mission statement. So we want to create a culture that promotes recovery, inspires hope, and values respect. We want to empower institutions to embrace and promote a recovery supportive college experience for any potential or current student in or seeking recovery. We want to make recovery the norm in higher education in West Virginia and the nation. And we want to affirm and inspire hope among students living and thriving in recovery to reach their fullest potential. And that last one is probably the most important because it's about the students. But where we are in kind of our mission in West Virginia is a multi-pronged approach. We're looking at systemic change and hopefully getting collegiate recovery institutionalized, which means basically higher education promotes and expects this. Similar to, years ago, we didn't have veteran centers on campus. We didn't have various cultural centers on campus. We didn't have women's centers. We didn't have LGBTQ centers. And all of those have become normalized. And what we would really like to see, I'm sorry, could folks please mute? Thank you. What we really want to see is collegiate recovery be the expectation and the norm, so that if individuals are going to school, it's not a question of do the schools have collegiate recovery? It's an expectation that every school will have it. So the economic development of Southern West Virginia, the Alliance for the Economic Development of Southern West Virginia, is an alliance, and 10 schools came together several years ago, the presidents, to address economic development. And many of you probably remember a report that came out several years ago from John Deskins at WVU about the economic impact of the addiction crisis. And so, partnered with some of the other economic challenges, these presidents came together and created this alliance. And the schools are listed here. There were 10 in the southern part of the state. And when this project was proposed, it was proposed to be the Southern West Virginia Collegiate Recovery Network. And we really wanted to broaden reach beyond the southern part of the state. We're small enough that I think we can do that. So the schools that are highlighted in teal are the schools that signed on with our grant-funded project. And what that means is those schools, we have a dedicated position for a peer support specialist for each one of those campuses. Since the grant has been received and we've started our work, Mount West, they are self-funding a program, so they're in the development phase. WVU Tech received one of the state grants that I referred to earlier, and New River Community and Technical College is, we are in talks with them about how we can utilize some of our peer support specialists that maybe don't have as big a campuses to help out with New River's various locations. And then we collaborate with, with WVU and, I'm sorry, I can't need to move that, and Eastern Community and Technical College. So Eastern, they partner with Potomac Highlands Guild, and then WVU has their own collegiate recovery program that is self-funded by the school. So we'll talk more about that. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment and introduce our peer support specialist staff. And I cannot see everyone who is in attendance. So if I'm just going to call names, and if you're here, unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Bridge Valley Community Technical College, Annette Johnson. She may already be on vacation. So Annette is with Bridge Valley. I know that Brandon's here. So Brandon, would you like to unmute and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Brandon Whitehouse. I'm the collegiate recovery coach at Concord University in Athens, West Virginia. It's a pleasure to be a part of this presentation. Thanks for having us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. And at Marshall, we have two. We have Chastity Street, and her position is funded through our grant. And then we have a student peer recovery support specialist, Rebecca Tomlin. So ladies, if you're here, you want to unmute and introduce yourselves?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chastity Street, and I'm a peer recovery support specialist for the Marshall University Collegiate Recovery Community, and I'm glad to be here.
Is Rebecca with us?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Tomlin, and I also work with the Marshall University Collegiate Recovery Community, and I'm grateful to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. And Southern West Virginia Community and Technical College, Nikki Chapin.
Hi guys, I'm Nikki Chafin and I'm the PRSS at Southern West Virginia Community Technical College, and my office is at the Logan campus, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Nikki. And last but not least, Kenny Matthews.
Kenneth Matthews. I'm the collegiate peer recovery coach at West Virginia State University and Institute. It's one of the only HBCUs in West Virginia.
Thanks, Kenny. So we've got a great team of folks. Some of our coaches have been with us for a period of time and some are relatively new. So we're really excited to have all of them. They're the boots on the ground at our campuses. We have 2 positions available, just in case anyone here knows a student who has recently graduated or somebody who is in recovery working in the peer field. Bluefield State College and West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine. Those positions can be found on our website under the Join Our Team tab. Individuals do have to be eligible, meet the eligibility requirements for the PRSS credential, which does require individuals to have lived experience and be in personal recovery from a substance use disorder. So a little bit about the Alliance for the Economic Development of Southern West Virginia. And I've got our website down here, wv3's.net. If we have the time, I'll show you that website. We have a number of really great resources on that website. We have the Small Communities Big Solutions Conference coming up again in November. It's a tremendous conference. We have reached hundreds of people around the state. The Alliance has 4 working groups, and our project falls under the Addiction Recovery and Reentry Group. And Sarah Payne Scarborough is my boss and the chair of the Alliance. So you can learn more about the Alliance at wv3's.net. So how our project is set up requires a tremendous amount of partnership and collaboration. So as I mentioned before, we're funded by the SOAR grant through DHHR, which is funded from SAMHSA. In addition to the 7 schools that we partnered with, we work with 3 behavioral health centers, Prestera, Southern Highlands, and Seneca. The Behavioral Health Center hires the peer support specialists, and they provide clinical supervision for the peer. Then each school has a designated point of contact, and then there's oversight of the project provided by the program coordinator, which is me. I know that some of this information is really difficult to see and it's small, but what I really wanted you to see is the map. And I'm really excited about this project for a number of reasons. This has been my passion and field I've been working in for the last 7 of my 30-year career. And you know, we really have the opportunity to help so many people. It's just mind-blowing when we think about it. And we have 44 institutions of higher education in our state. That doesn't include trade schools and junior colleges. So it's actually a little bit more. And nationally, only about 4% of schools across the country have collegiate recovery programs or communities. And we have, you know, a footprint of 12 with the ones that we fund, the ones that we don't fund, but everyone that we collaborate with. And so that is a much more significant percentage than the national percent. So I'm really looking for West Virginia to emerge as a leader in this area and serve as a model for other states around the country. So just briefly, a little bit about the development of collegiate recovery in West Virginia. In 2013, WVU formed an advisory group, which was comprised of students, staff, faculty, alumni, community members, parents, and behavioral health providers in the area. They you know, spent time planning. They visited Texas Tech, which they received a grant from SAMHSA to basically package up their curriculum and make that a replication project so that other schools would have somewhat of a guide as to how to create these programs. We have a saying in collegiate recovery that if you've seen one CRP, you've seen one CRP, which is both the blessing and the curse. The blessing is that it gives schools and communities a lot of flexibility to define themselves. There are some best practices and recommended standards. Our national association is in the process of creating an accreditation. So in the future, collegiate recovery programs and communities will have the option to become accredited, which is a good thing. So in 2015, the program was officially launched at WVU, and the school provided 2 part-time positions for a director and a recovery specialist. I had the great privilege to work with Dr. Kathy Ura, who was the visionary for the first collegiate recovery program in West Virginia. And she retired last year and turned the reins over to Olivia Pape, who's done a tremendous job with that community during the pandemic. We got space a year later. A lot of times on campus, space is at a premium and creates a lot of challenges for the growth of these communities, but space is one of the best practices and recommendations for a successful program. In 2018, state funds through the West Virginia legislature, through the Office of Drug Control Policy, were secured. The original opioid response plan was funded at $10 million through the legislature, and out of that 10 million, 100,000 was designated so that we could award 5 programs, grants of $20,000 to get started. Some of the schools had other funding that they had already gotten started with. There used to be a national organization called Transforming Youth Recovery. Before that, it was called the Stacey Mathewson Foundation, and she seeded over 100 programs across the country at $10,000 each. So that influx, that started in 2012, and that influx of funding and attention to collegiate recovery caused this field to absolutely just explode. Prior to 2012, you could probably count the number of collegiate recovery programs on your hands and toes. And after 2012, it just really took off. And it's continued to grow since then. So we're now official members of ARHE, which is our national association, are about 150 to 160. And then there are programs that are not members. So, we estimate probably fewer than 200 programs across the country. So in 2019, the SOAR funds for the West Virginia Collegiate Recovery Network were awarded. And then ODCP renewed their funding for 4 schools across the state. The Fairmont State dropped out, but WVU, Marshall, West Virginia State, and Bridge Valley continued to get funding. And 3 of the 4 of those are, of course, in our network footprint. So they have been, making efforts in this area for several years now. What our SOAR funds and our grant was able to do was to provide the dedicated staff. And that's one of the other best practices and recommendations for what makes successful collegiate recovery programs, is having that staff, that it is their sole job to be that staff person to move these programs forward and support students. In 2020 and 2021, the Office of Drug Control Policy grants were continued. They added an additional 3 grants. However, only 2 schools applied for those. WVU Tech and Concord received those funds. So that gives them some flexibility to be able to add other things to their program that our funds aren't able to support. And then our funding was continued through year 3 and were written into year 4 for the state opioid response funding. So just a few highlights, and we could spend several hours talking about all the great things that our peer recovery support specialists have been able to do over the last year and a half. But to just bring attention to a few of the highlights, because I really want to get into some other things around the what and the why and the how of collegiate recovery. So this information is as of February. So these numbers have increased since then, but we've trained probably over 300 people around the state to be recovery allies, and we'll talk about what that means. We've had 4 statewide events and had now it's well over 400 people attend those events, because we hosted Reducing Risk in Higher Education in April. I'm sorry, March, and then we had Collegiate Recovery Day in April. We have provided, I'm sure, over 300 people now with individual and group support. We've hosted, it's actually probably more like 600 naloxone trainings and kits distributed. And then we started a couple of collaborative meetings. The Higher Education Substance Use Disorder Continuum of Care Collaborative. So that involves folks at systems levels from different parts of the continuum of care to come together and talk about what we're doing so that we can collaborate and move forward together to reach all of our goals collectively. And then we have supported the Connections app. So if folks aren't familiar with Connections, it's an app, it's an online community, and it has all kinds of wonderful features. I don't know if you had a presentation about Connections at the social work conference, but you can get more information. I'm sorry, could you
sent you a message I got from that private psychologist?
So,
do you have the ability to mute everybody, Danielle?
yeah, I do. One moment.
Well, she texted me first.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. Wait a minute.
And I'm gonna mute you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So as I was saying, the Connections app is a tremendous resource. We have done some additional marketing on our college campuses. When individuals sign up for the app, they're asked if they're a student, and if so, what school. So we're hoping to reach more students through the app. And then if individuals aren't familiar with naloxone or Narcan, there's a picture of one of the devices to help save lives, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So some other events, services, and projects. We have been offering naloxone training weekly and by special arrangement since right after the pandemic hit. So I came on board at the end of October 2019. We got our staff hired, and within weeks, COVID shut things down. So right after the shutdown, there was a tremendous spike in overdoses and overdose deaths in Wyoming County. And in response to that, our recovery specialist who was previously at Bluefield, we worked closely with Dr. Lindsay Akery at the University of Charleston and transitioned what had been done in person into an online delivery of naloxone training. And so we have done that on a weekly basis, multiple times for well over a year. And it's really been a tremendous service. All of our peer specialists are trained as trainers. Brandon still hosts a weekly Thursday at 2 o'clock naloxone training. And again, if folks are looking for training, we're more than glad to set up video or in-person naloxone trainings. This has been tremendous in terms of stigma. This has been really progress in terms of getting naloxone available in higher education. So this is really a project, that I'm very proud of. Recovery ally training is something else that we've spent a lot of time doing and providing, and we'll talk a little more about that. But if you're interested in becoming a recovery ally, we're able to do that virtually. And as folks are getting vaccinated, we're able to do these things in person more and more. So eventually, hopefully you'll be able to meet folks in person. We have multiple open weekly support groups, and through the pandemic, our groups have been open not only to students, faculty, and staff and people associated with our institutions, but they've been open to people in the community. And something that is a tremendous benefit with our peers being employees of behavioral health centers is we're not restricted to just working on campus. We're able to really get out there in the community and work with community-based organizations, whether they are affiliated with recovery or not. But we like to work with recovery residences and treatment programs. And part of that is to really perpetuate that message of hope that if individuals want higher education, that it's possible. As I mentioned before, are collaborative. And then we have been part of a group to address harm reduction in higher education. So we started a monthly national discussion group on harm reduction in higher education back in December. And the last few months, we've focused on developing a survey to get an idea of what harm reduction services are made available through higher education. So we'll be releasing the results of this survey in June at the National Collegiate Recovery Conference. And then probably more the results and looking at the comparison between national and West Virginia data at our conference listed here. Save the date, September 24th, for our second annual West Virginia Collegiate Recovery Conference. That is planned to be held in person in Lewisburg, and that is in conjunction with the Healing Appalachia concert, which will be the 24th and 25th. So I'd like to back up and just talk a few minutes about what is recovery for folks that might not be as familiar with this concept. And if folks want to put some ideas about what you think recovery is in the chat. And for individuals that wish to identify themselves, if you want to post, what recovery means to you, that might also help those that aren't as familiar understand the significance of recovery. So when we think about the definition of recovery, most of us have been exposed to the SAMHSA definition. And that definition is listed here as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. You notice that substances, drugs, and alcohol aren't listed anywhere in that definition. And this is a pretty broad definition. Some collegiate recovery communities and programs are more inclusive of behavioral health and other process type addictions, or what's referred to as a process type addiction. Many are open to behavioral health, which includes disordered eating and eating disorders. And that's something that I'm really proud of with all of our schools, is that we're very, very inclusive. So that anyone who's struggling with any of these, any issues, or are impacted by somebody else's use. So it could be friends, family members, or individuals who want to embrace a sober lifestyle. They may not have ever had a problem, I can't imagine anybody who doesn't know someone who's been impacted by substance use disorder, but our programs are really open to anyone. So when folks start looking at definitions of recovery, you can see the graph here, and I know the print's really small, but going back to 2005, CSAT's definition, ASAM's definition, Betty Ford definition, recovery historian and living legend William White's definition, Scottish government, SAMHSA, ASAM revised theirs, Dr. Kelly and Hopner, and then the most recent addition to the definitions of recovery came from the Recovery Research Institute. And let me move some things around here because I'm covering things up. So a group came together in 2000, I think it was 16, and they released this definition of recovery in 2017. So it's the National Recovery Science Research Collaborative. And this was their consensus decision about defining recovery. And I've got the reference to the article here below if folks are interested in reading how that process happened. But a lot of the individuals who came up with this agreed upon definition came from collegiate recovery backgrounds or are working in collegiate recovery. And this, this group is housed at Kennesaw State University. But is a collaborative of people from all over the country. So their definition is recovery is an intentional, dynamic, and relational process involving sustained efforts to improve multiple aspects of wellness, which vary by individual, social, and experiential contexts. So I really like this definition because it gives us a little bit more flexibility. So I'd also want to mention some various pathways of recovery, and this is important in terms of collegiate recovery because at the inception of collegiate recovery, programs were really grounded and based in 12-step abstinence-based recovery, and many still are. However, as things have evolved and changed over the years, many incorporate multiple pathways to recovery. All of our peer support specialists are trained in SMART recovery and host SMART recovery meetings and SMART recovery for friends and family. So I just wanted to mention this, and there has also been some expansion to include medication-assisted recovery. That has been a shift in the field in general to recognize that medication-assisted recovery is a pathway to recovery. So a little bit more about collegiate recovery itself. So collegiate recovery communities and programs are essentially designed by and for students in recovery, ideally. Now, there are situations where these programs are not organic and situations where they are. So in some situations, you have a group of students who come together and then approach the administration and say, this is something that we want to do. It can be very informal, to students just meeting up, to having an official student organization, to having a full-blown program and community such as what we're trying to build. Collegiate recovery is a national movement. So just another history moment here. Collegiate recovery has been around since the late 70s. The first program was established at Brown University. And again, it was very little known around the country until about 2012. Recovery high schools are also a thing. So we are in conversation about doing a feasibility study about having a recovery high school in West Virginia. Probably the one closest to West Virginia is over in Columbus, and it's a fairly new, just in the last couple of years. But recovery high schools have predated collegiate recovery programs. And when this was pre-internet, so this is really a long time ago, there were people doing recovery high schools, people doing collegiate recovery. And because we didn't have the communication that we have now with the internet, they didn't know about each other. So they came together and created the Association of Recovery Schools. And then they, when they reached a critical mass, they diverged, but still are very collaborative, and we host our national conference together. So there's still the Association of Recovery Schools for recovery high schools and the Association of Recovery and Higher Education for collegiate recovery. Collegiate recovery addresses the unique challenges of recovery that students face in a college environment and is evolving and inclusive. So these programs are housed within institutions of higher education that confer degrees, have paid, qualified, trained, ethical staff, have a dedicated space, provide a variety of recovery support programmatic elements that assist students in maintaining and protecting their recovery, have within them a community of students who offer peer support to each other, and identify and collaborate with on and off campus partners and stakeholders. And this is really important. And then our nonprofit entities, we really tried to keep the profit entities out of this world. There are some that have made some efforts, but we are really passionate about keeping this as a nonprofit mission, so that it doesn't get co-opted and individuals end up being charged hundreds and hundreds of dollars to receive this support. So looking at where we fit on campus, this is a little bit of a continuum of care. So on campus, we have prevention, which is required by federal law. And within prevention, there's education, social norming, and resiliency activities. And then there are intervention services such as expert, mentorship, peer-to-peer, and referral to treatment. And then there are collegiate recovery programs, which provide a place for students to call home. Many offer holistic wellness activities. yoga, cooking, outdoor hikes, animal assisted therapy, everything you can imagine, academic supports and peer support. So you might be asking yourself, why? Why would we want to do this? Why are we doing this? And part of it has to do, as I mentioned earlier, about the other affinity type groups. Oops, see a typo, I'm sorry. But this is really getting to some equity and inclusion issues that the recovering population is often underserved and marginalized. We want to, and I included a quote here from Austin Brown, to really promote diversity on campuses, college and universities must have initiatives, excuse me, that recognize and support students in recovery. And there's a lot of diversity within students that are part of these programs. Collegiate recovery programs align with the values of higher education. It's the right thing to do. It's a financially wise investment, and Sierra Castedo de Martel has developed a whole return on investment and financial strategy and formula to help sell this to higher education. And it's effective and enhances our campus community. Folks may be familiar or may not be familiar with the phrase or the term recovery capital, but recovery capital is comprised of personal, social, and family, community, and culture. And many of our collegiate recovery programs focus on a variety of capital building areas, including academics, social, financial, family, and career. And the real glue that keeps this together is community, community, community. So having this community, and many of you, I'm sure, have heard the phrase, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. And so this provides that place on campus. Many schools provide academic scholarships, and many of our schools provide academic scholarships. The network is fundraising right now to provide a scholarship. And yesterday, I had the privilege to be present for WVU's Collegiate Recovery graduation, which was virtual and in person. And a young man that is a close person to me received $4,000 in scholarships yesterday. So, you know, and many schools provide, and it might be a small, you know, couple $100 up to many thousands of dollars. I would like to recognize Lynn Fruth and Fruth Pharmacy for the Bridge of Hope Scholarship that they established in West Virginia several years ago for individuals in recovery. And that fund is not just there for higher education, it's there for other avenues that lead to employment. So that's also a resource that we have in our state. Sober social events, sober tailgates, sober New Year's parties, sober Halloween parties. So, you know, having an environment to do things that everyone else gets to do, but in a social supportive environment. Service opportunities, retreats, conferences. ARHE used to host what they called a ski-a-thon. And so I didn't have the privilege of attending one, but they would gather in Colorado and have several days of skiing and fellowship, and people, it was life-changing for many of the people who got to participate in that. Many schools have recovery night where they come together and recognize recovery, have a recovery celebration. And then many programs have what they call seminar. So the direct benefits improves long-term recovery outcomes, increase retention and graduation rates, higher than average GPAs. I will share with you some data from the graduation yesterday. WVU's graduated 44 since 2016, and the average GPA is 3.423. So when we think about why institutions might want to support these programs and invest in these programs, retention and recruitment are big issues in higher education. So the students that are in recovery, they have a higher retention rate. They are going to stay. So, you know, from a financial standpoint, they're going to be customers for a longer period of time, you know, bottom line. They have more orientation towards service, so they're going to be more involved in giving back in the community. And then with this graphic here, you can see some of the other information. This is from a study of characteristics of collegiate recovery alumni. Collegiate recovery has very similar outcomes to professional monitoring programs. So for those of you that aren't familiar with those, professional monitoring programs are programs for professionals who have impairments because of their substance use disorder. They self-identify, self-submit themselves to these programs in order to keep their licenses. Most of the time, some form of treatment and ongoing treatment engagement is required, but and they're engaged for usually 5 years. And so that 5-year outcome is very similar to collegiate recovery. So they have a very high recovery rate that lasts for a long period of time. And we know the longer people are engaged in support, the more likely they are for the long haul to stay in recovery.
And Susie, I just want to let you know you're at 20 minutes.
I better hurry up. I better talk faster. Indirect benefits, it's about reducing stigma, a part of a broader cultural shift, and strengthens the local recovery community. This is a tremendous graphic, and we could spend a whole hour talking about this, but 2 of the people who get top billing for creating this are individuals who were in collegiate recovery programs. So Robert Ashford and Austin Brown. This is a great graphic to help people understand a little bit more about how to use non-stigmatizing and less stigmatizing language, and it breaks it down in terms of the setting, because certain terms are acceptable in certain settings, but there are certain terms that we really don't want to see used in media and by journalists because it perpetuates stigma. So I would like to issue a call to action, which goes back to what we just touched on, to use recovery-oriented person-first language, to get trained in carry naloxone and advocate for naloxone on campus and in your organization and agencies. Every person should be carrying naloxone. Every agency should have this on site. Full stop. Becoming a recovery ally, which we can help you with. Contact your alma mater. I assume probably most folks that are attending this conference have gone to school. Contact your alma mater and ask them if they have one, and if not, why not? And offer to help them explore this concept. We are here to help support that. It's one of the things we do as a network, is technical assistance. Reach out to students and potential students. So if you have contact with individuals that you know are in recovery, please help them understand that these programs can be developed and are being developed in our state. Launch an anti-stigma campaign. Join us for the national conference, June 21st through 24th, and the West Virginia conference in September. One of the things that we have done over the last several months to help with getting folks to think about going to school is a series called Overcoming Higher Education Barriers. And we have all of those are housed on the Alliance website. And a few things that we've been involved in this spring. Just quickly, the reentry day this year, the theme was reentry with a focus on education. So we had presentations with this event on collegiate recovery and barriers to higher education. We have a Recovery Matters series where we're doing various interviews, not only with our peer specialist staff, but other people that are in the recovery world. So if you would like to be interviewed for our Recovery Matters series, feel free to send me an email at mullins20@marshall.edu, and that's Mullins with an E. And we had a Women in Recovery Day in honor of International Women's Day this year on March 8th. And I was told that our reach has been over 30,000 people with that event. Over 30,000 people have seen or participated in that event. which was live streamed on Facebook. This was in collaboration with the West Virginia Recovery Advocacy Project and the Women's Alliance for Recovery Movement. And in March, we hosted a Reducing Risk in Higher Education. That video will be available on our website, as is the conference from last year. It's available also on our website. And I always conclude my presentations with this quote from a woman who's been a mentor to me, and she was the softball coach at Davis and Elkins College a couple of decades ago, so she has a connection with West Virginia. But she's known for saying that no one should have to choose between recovery and a college education. So let me figure out how to stop sharing here. Well, my toolbar disappeared.
I think I can
There,
help you out.
there it is.
Okay.
Had to uncover it there. Yes, I will be more than glad to send out the charts and the language. You can also Google recovery dialects and hit photo or graphic or image, and that will pop up. So at this point in time, I'd like to open it up for questions. And if you have questions or would like to hear directly from some of our staff, I'll encourage folks to ask questions of them as well.
So we did have a couple one. It was, what is a place to call home?
What is a place to call home? Could you be a little more specific about the question?
That was me. It was part of the listing of the resources that progression to collegiate recovery, and you said that you offer a place to call home in capital letters.
Yeah, so a place to call home on campus. So a location on campus that students can feel is a safe home base for them on campus. So all of our schools have a designated space where students can get together and hang out. Kenny at West Virginia State University has a suite of rooms, which is fantastic. Has its own kitchen, has its own bathroom, has a group room space, has an office for the peer specialists. At WVU, they have a whole townhouse. So, you know, it looks very different across the country. I've been to some that are literally almost like a broom closet. And then you have programs such as Texas Tech, which is kind of the mecca where they have their own freestanding buildings. There are some schools that provide recovery, residential recovery options on campus. So Rutgers and Augsburg were the first and are probably still the largest, but there are, you know, schools that have entire buildings that are basically recovery dorms. We don't have that yet in West Virginia, but hopefully. Do we have other questions, Danielle?
Not at the moment, unless anyone has any they would like to ask themselves. Don't be shy, folks.
Okay, so we've got, what about colleges not supporting the place where problems originate on their own campus? Limited supervision. Yeah, so we are all over the place in terms of, and the way I like to think of this, because if I don't, I get very frustrated and upset. We really have to think about this in terms of stages of change, and that some schools are in denial that there is a problem. You know, I don't really know how that happens, but we all know that denial is a very powerful thing. And it really starts with somebody starting the conversation and finding somebody who will listen. And that's where alumni have tremendous power. Students have tremendous power because, you know, that is where the funding comes from. You know, schools depend on tuition. And I will say in West Virginia, we have had tremendous support from the chancellor. She has spoken at our events and, really supports what we're doing. So I would encourage, encourage folks to find somebody on campus, or if you're the parent, if you're an alumni, to reach out. And if folks have more specific, sensitive situations or questions that they'd like to discuss offline, feel free to send me an email, and I'm glad to talk with you and kind of go through maybe some strategies and approaches. Because I do think that administrators want to do the right thing. I think that a lot of it comes from fear, and a lot of the fear comes from stigma.
So we had a question actually came in the chat from Jessica. Said, if you have a child in college who is 17 and needed inpatient treatment, to whom do you refer them, or what is the procedure you would use? She said it might be a question for the PRSS. For me here at West Virginia State, my procedure is I'm housed in the counseling and accessibility service portion of the campus. I'm not clinical, so I would refer that to my direct supervisor, who is actually clinical, is licensed for things like that, because that's more of a specialized thing. We can also refer them, I can refer them out to Prestera Health, Prestera Center, or other any other health services organizations that I might have resources or connections to. The PRSS is more so a connection to resources on the campuses. We don't, give clinical advice or anything like that, because we're not licensed to do that. As a recovery coach, what we do is empower the individuals to make decisions based on what they really intrinsically already know is the correct course of action. We listen, we believe, we encourage, we advocate. And when we do those things, it empowers the individual to take control of their life outside of their substance use, mental health, or any other co-occurring issues that they have.
And I'll add to that, Kenny, that if folks are in need of immediate assistance, and with this person being 17, it's a little bit of a gray area, because they even though they're not 18, they still do have the ability to refuse treatment unless they're put through a probable cause and ordered to treatment. And sometimes it's a honey rather than vinegar approach. And it's also terribly frightening for family members because of the lethality of what we're dealing with substance use, because so many things are tainted with fentanyl, and overdoses are happening, and people aren't intending to overdose. They just don't know that what they're using is adulterated with something that's going to kill them. But the 844 Help for WV, that is going to be your first line to access care. There are also folks, if they don't want to go through a hotline such as that, there are people that specialize in placement of individuals if the person is willing to go to treatment. And again, I didn't give y'all my credentials, but I'm certified as an advanced alcohol and drug counselor, licensed psychologist, and licensed professional counselor. So not that I can advise exactly on a situation, not having full information, but if you are looking for someone to talk with, certainly send me a message. And I'm glad to talk with you offline to connect you with someone that might be in your area. And then also the Help for WV folks have peer specialists in each region, and that can be very helpful. That they're very willing to meet with folks and help determine, what their need is.
And another question that was sent directly to me, and I'll read it for them, is what about assisting in expunging recovering persons who want to pursue a career, but due to a felony, they are limited into what field they can go into? So, how could they go about getting help with that?
Well, I'm going to throw this one over to Kenny because this is his area of expertise.
Not only am I a collegiate peer recovery coach, I'm also a formerly incarcerated person. So I do a lot of work with expungements and things like that. We have in West Virginia, there's several second chance programs that are available, and we can connect them with organizations like Jobs and Hope, who have an expungement program where they work with lawyers and legal representatives to expunge those things. Also, we deal with the misinformation regarding financial aid. For instance, a lot of people feel that because they have a drug conviction that they're no longer eligible for financial aid. However, that's incorrect. Where the problem comes in is if you were having that drug conviction, that drug charge, while you were still receiving the federal financial aid. So we help individuals understand that higher education is something that they can attain. And it's an area that even with felony convictions that they can go into. There's also through West Virginia Cares, a variance process for certain jobs that you can go through, such as that I did to have the PRSS position that I currently have. Because I have several felony drug convictions, I had to go through a variance process where they looked at what I've been doing since my convictions. I had letters of recommendation and showing that I've moved on forward from that past behavior. In doing that, they look at it and you pass your variance, that lasts. It gives you basically a certificate saying that you can work in these positions, and it lasts unless you got another conviction or got into subsequent trouble after that point. Like Brandon mentioned, there's CORE, which is creating opportunities of recovery employment. So they work with a lot of people that are in recovery, that have had that justice involved stuff, and work with them to get them into employment positions to help them further their goals in their life.
Thank you. Absolutely. And there's some great resources being added into the chat. And definitely, if you have PRSS near you, at my facility, we personally have them finally. And it's been so great to have that added resource because you all just add a whole nother element of help to a person's recovery. So definitely reach out to them. Sorry. Little support plug.
Well, thank you all very much for attending this session today. We appreciate your time and interest in this, and really look forward to having your support if you want to help us move this initiative forward across the state.
Great deal. Thank you all so much. And we will conclude this session, but please reach out to them if you have any further questions, and we'll see you all throughout today.